When I saw my daughter-in-law Melissa dragging that heavy black suitcase down the dirt path toward Lake Willow, I thought she'd finally decided to get rid of her old junk. But then I heard the splash. Deep, heavy, final. My stomach turned cold. Something about the way she looked over her shoulder before pushing it in told me this wasn't about cleaning up. She stood there for a few seconds, breathing hard, her hands trembling as she watched the bubbles rise. Then she straightened her coat, glanced around, and walked back toward the house as if nothing had happened. I waited. Not a sound except the wind brushing through the reeds. The lake had gone still, its surface calm again, hiding whatever secret she had just buried under its dark skin. When I was sure she was gone, I whispered to myself, "Okay, Margaret. Breathe." I took my phone out, switched on the flashlight, and slowly made my way to the edge of the water. Every step felt like walking through a nightmare. The beam of light trembled on the water. For a moment I saw it, something dark just below the surface, half floating, half sinking. A corner of that suitcase caught between two branches. I waded in, the cold biting my legs, until my fingers touched the slick fabric. It was heavier than I expected. Much heavier. I pulled with all my strength. Mud clung to my shoes. My heart hammered in my chest. When I finally dragged it onto the shore, I just stared. The lock was still closed, but one of the zippers was broken, and something pale was peeking through the gap, like fabric or maybe paper. That's when fear finally caught up with me. What if I was about to find something I could never unsee? Before I tell you what was inside, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened after this moment still feels unreal, even to me. And if you're new here, hit like and subscribe, because the truth I uncovered that night taught me a lesson no one should ever forget. I knelt down beside the suitcase, my fingers trembling as I tried to pull the zipper further. It didn't move, locked from the inside by something wedged tight. So I found a sharp rock and forced it open. The metallic teeth gave way with a screech that sliced through the quiet night. A strong, sweet smell filled the air, something between flowers and decay. I covered my nose, shining my flashlight inside. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Rows of white envelopes. Dozens of them, tied together with red ribbons, each marked with a date every month of the last 3 years. And on top of them, a single photograph. Melissa, standing with my late husband, smiling, his arm around her shoulders. My heart stopped. He'd been gone for almost 4 years. The photo was dated 1 year after his death. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled, casting wild beams across the trees. The world started spinning. Melissa, my sweet, polite daughter-in-law, who'd married my son only 6 months ago, had been hiding this. Letters from my dead husband? Pictures that shouldn't exist? I grabbed the first bundle of envelopes, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The first one read, "To Margaret, open when you're ready." I froze. The handwriting was his, my husband's. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry, but my body just wouldn't move. Behind me, a branch snapped. I turned, heart in my throat, but no one was there, just the sound of the lake gently rippling against the shore. I gathered the envelopes back into the suitcase, shut it, and dragged it to the side under the trees. I needed time to think. I couldn't let Melissa know I had seen this, not yet. As I walked back to the house, the night air felt heavy, almost watching me. Every step toward the porch felt like walking deeper into a lie I had been living without knowing. Inside, the living room light was still on. The clock read 11:47 p.m. Melissa's car keys were gone from the table, but her phone lay charging on the counter. For a woman who had just dumped a suitcase in the lake, she looked oddly calm in the family photo on the mantel, standing next to my son, Thomas, smiling that perfect smile of hers. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so badly it spilled across the counter. My mind replayed the image of her throwing that suitcase again and again. What was she hiding from me? From Thomas? When the door finally opened 15 minutes later, Melissa stepped inside like nothing had happened. Her hair was damp from the fog, her lipstick slightly smudged. "Oh, Mother," she said sweetly, "you're still awake?" I forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make tea." She smiled back too brightly. "I was just getting some air. Needed to clear my head. Wedding planning is stressful, you know." "Of course," I replied, pretending to sip my water. She kissed my cheek, her perfume strong enough to make my stomach twist, the same scent that lingered on that suitcase. When she went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen until I heard her bedroom door close. Then I went back outside, barefoot, the cold dirt grounding me in reality. The suitcase was still where I'd hidden it. I carried it quietly into the garage and covered it with an old blanket behind the shelf of paint cans. Tomorrow morning, I promised myself, I'll open those letters. But that night, I barely slept. Every sound of wind or creak of the house felt like footsteps outside. At dawn, I made coffee and sat by the window, staring toward the lake. Mist hung over the water like a ghost. And then I saw her again, Melissa, standing on the same spot where she'd thrown the suitcase. Only this time she wasn't alone. Someone else was with her, a tall man in a gray coat. They were arguing. She kept pointing toward the water. My breath caught as the man suddenly shoved her shoulder hard. She stumbled back, then slapped him. He grabbed her wrist, whispered something, and stormed off toward the road. Melissa dropped to her knees, clutching her face. What was happening? That moment, I knew whatever was inside that suitcase was bigger than I thought. And by the end of the day, it would change everything I believed about my family. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the echo of that suitcase hitting the water still thudding in my chest. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The air felt colder, heavier, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I went straight to the garage. The blanket covering the suitcase was still in place, but something told me to check. I pulled it aside and froze. A muddy footprint, fresh. Someone had been here. I crouched down, touching the print with my fingertips, still damp. My pulse spiked. Was Melissa up during the night? Had she come looking for the suitcase? If she had, she didn't take it. Maybe she didn't notice I had moved it. Or maybe she was testing me. I couldn't risk waiting any longer. I dragged the suitcase out again, sat on the cold floor, and began pulling out the bundles of envelopes one by one. Each one had my name written in the same familiar hand. My late husband's. Some were dated before he died, some after. I opened the first one with trembling hands. My dearest Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Something I feared might happen long before my heart gave out. I stopped breathing. The next lines blurred in my vision as tears welled up. There are people around you who are not who they seem. I can't tell you everything yet, but if you ever find the box I left for Thomas, make sure he never gives it to Melissa. She's not who you think she is. I pressed the letter to my chest. My husband had known. Somehow before he died, he knew something about her. I reached for another envelope. This one dated 2 months after his funeral. Margaret, it said. I don't know if you'll ever believe this, but if she's still in your life by now, she has already done what I feared. Don't confront her until you've found the red key. Everything depends on that key. The red key? I had no idea what he meant. Before I could read another letter, I heard the floorboards creak overhead. I quickly stuffed the envelopes back, closed the suitcase, and covered it again. When I turned around, Melissa was standing in the doorway, still in her silk robe, her eyes sharp despite the forced smile on her lips. "Oh, you're up early," she said. "I thought I heard something down here." I forced a shaky laugh. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd organize the old boxes." Her gaze flicked to the covered suitcase, just for a second, but enough for me to notice. Then she smiled sweetly. "Always so tidy," she said, her voice syrupy. "You know, Thomas and I were thinking of redoing this whole garage. Maybe clear out some old junk." My stomach twisted. Old junk. That's what she'd called it before throwing it into the lake. "Well," I replied, "if there's anything you don't need, let me handle it." "I wouldn't want you to strain yourself." She laughed lightly and walked back toward the stairs. But not before glancing back one more time, that same sharp, assessing look that made my skin crawl. As soon as she was gone, I locked the garage door. Later that day, I waited for Thomas to come home from work. My son had always been gentle. Too gentle, maybe. The kind of man who believed the best in everyone. Melissa knew how to play that perfectly. When he walked in, I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Hi, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Thomas?" Did your father ever leave you something before he passed away? A box, maybe? He frowned. A box? No, just his watch. Why? Just curious, I said quickly. I was sorting through some old things. He nodded absent-mindedly and started heading upstairs. But halfway he turned. Oh, and Mom, if you go near the lake, be careful. Melissa said she saw some coyotes around there last night. My blood ran cold. Coyotes? That was her cover story? I watched him disappear upstairs and felt the walls close in. She was already spinning a narrative, preparing lies before anyone asked questions. That evening, I went for a walk down by the lake again, my heart pounding with every step. The water was calm now, the reeds whispering softly in the wind. And then I saw it, a flash of something red under the old willow tree, half buried in mud. I knelt and brushed the dirt away. It was small, metallic, a key, a red key. My husband's words came flooding back. Everything depends on that key. I wiped it clean and tucked it into my pocket, my heart racing. When I returned home, the house felt different, too quiet. Melissa's car was still in the driveway, but the lights upstairs were off. I thought she'd gone to bed early, until I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The blanket in the garage was gone. The suitcase was missing. I ran up the stairs, trying to keep my breathing steady. Melissa's door was half open, and I could hear her voice, low, tense, talking to someone. I leaned closer. I told you, I'm handling it, she hissed. If she finds the letters, we're done. You have to get that box before she does. I don't care how, a male voice replied, muffled but firm. You said it was destroyed. I thought it was, she snapped. Just stay quiet until I fix this. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a vase. The sound made her stop talking. Hello? She called out, her tone suddenly sugary again. Is someone there? I hurried back to my room, locked the door, and pressed my ear against it. Her footsteps passed down the hall, then faded. I sat on my bed, clutching the red key, shaking. Who was she talking to? What was in that missing box my husband mentioned? And how was it all connected to those letters? One thing was certain. Melissa wasn't who she pretended to be. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Around 2 a.m., I heard the faint sound of a car engine starting. I peeked out the window. Melissa was leaving, alone. The suitcase wasn't in the back seat. Where was she taking it? My instincts screamed that whatever was inside those letters was dangerous, maybe even deadly. The next morning, I got a call from Officer Carter, an old friend of my husband's. Margaret, he said carefully, I don't want to alarm you, but someone filed a missing property report this morning. A woman named Melissa Roberts claims someone stole her belongings from your garage last night. Said it was a family matter but wanted it documented. My hands went cold. She's lying, I said flatly. And Officer Carter, please don't come here yet. I'll call you if things get worse. After hanging up, I went straight to the shed behind the house. That's where I found it. The suitcase, half hidden under a tarp, with a note taped to it in my husband's handwriting. If you found the key, you're close. But don't open this alone. That was the moment I realized the truth wasn't just about betrayal. It was about something far more dangerous, something that could destroy what was left of my family. And by the time the sun set that evening, I'd have no choice but to open it. By sunrise, the suitcase sat on the wooden table in my shed, muddy, silent, waiting. The red key gleamed in the soft morning light like a drop of blood. I stood there for a long time, my hands trembling over the lock. My late husband's note echoed in my head. Don't open this alone. But I was done being afraid. Whatever secret had destroyed my peace, I was ready to face it. I slid the red key into the lock. It turned smoothly with a faint click. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of sealed folders and photographs, was a small metal box. My breath hitched when I saw my husband's initials carved on it, H.R. Henry Roberts. The first folder was marked Project Cedar Fall, stamped Confidential. I opened it and froze. Dozens of documents, newspaper clippings, and typed letters, all about a corporate investigation. My husband had been gathering evidence against someone, names of companies, offshore accounts, and, I gasped, Melissa's maiden name, Melissa Vance. One file had her photo attached, a much younger version, but unmistakable. The caption read, "Suspected of embezzlement during Cedar Fall Bank scandal. Charges dropped due to insufficient evidence." My mind went blank. Melissa involved in a fraud case? I flipped through the pages faster. There were records of secret payments, contracts signed by Thomas Roberts, my son's name, but with a forged signature, and a note from Henry. "If anything happens to me, look at Melissa's connection to Cedar Fall. She's not here by chance." My knees gave out, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a setup, one that had started long before she married my son. Suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside the shed. My heart raced. I slammed the lid shut, grabbed the box, and stuffed it under a tarp. The door creaked open. "Mom?" Thomas's voice. "You out here?" I forced a calm breath. "Yes, sweetheart, just cleaning." He stepped in, still in his work clothes, holding his coffee mug. "Melissa said you were up all night again." "You should rest." I managed a weak smile. "I will. Just had something on my mind." He nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the tarp. "What's that?" I froze. "Just old tools." He shrugged and sipped his coffee. "Mom, you've been tense lately. Is everything okay between you and Melissa?" I swallowed hard. "Thomas, do you trust your wife?" He frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer me, please." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Of course I trust her. She's been stressed lately, but who isn't?" I wanted to tell him everything, the letters, the key, the documents, but something stopped me. The image of my husband's note, "Don't open this alone." If I told Thomas now, and he told her, she would destroy everything. "Never mind," I said softly. "I just worry too much." He smiled faintly. "That's what moms do." As soon as he left, I took the small box and the documents into my room and hid them behind an old family portrait. That afternoon, Melissa acted perfectly normal. Too normal. She prepared lunch, chatted about random things, and even suggested a family dinner night next week. But I noticed the subtle things. Her eyes constantly scanning, her phone always within reach, her laugh slightly forced. At one point, she looked right at me and said, "You know, Margaret, sometimes holding on to the past only hurts more. Maybe it's time to let go of some of Henry's old stuff." I smiled politely, but felt the warning behind her words. That night, I waited until she and Thomas were asleep before locking my bedroom door. I took out the metal box and finally opened it. Inside were 4 things: a flash drive labeled "Cedar Fall Evidence Final," a single photo, Melissa standing beside a man in a black suit, both smiling in front of a Cedar Fall Bank sign, a handwritten note from Henry, a document, last will and testament, amended draft. My pulse quickened as I unfolded the note. "Margaret, if you ever find this, it means Melissa succeeded in something I couldn't stop. I changed the will before my death. Our entire estate, including the bakery and savings, goes to Thomas, but with a clause. If Melissa is proven to have been involved in any financial crime, everything transfers solely to you." I clutched the note, tears filling my eyes. Henry had known she was dangerous. He had protected us, even after death. I turned to the flash drive. My laptop hummed softly as I plugged it in. Dozens of files appeared, scanned contracts, bank transfers, even emails between Melissa and a man named Alan Grant. The same man from the photo. One message stood out. "Melissa, once the inheritance is secured, move the funds to our Cayman account. No loose ends." My stomach churned. That's why she married Thomas. That's why she wanted Henry's files gone. She wasn't just a liar. She was planning to steal everything. I copied all the files onto a second flash drive and hid it in my pocket. The next morning, I confronted her, but not directly. As we sat for breakfast, I said casually, "I dreamed about Henry last night." "He said something strange." Melissa looked up sharply. "Oh, what did he say?" "He said, 'Beware the red key.'" For the first time, I saw her mask slip. Her fork froze midair. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice suddenly tense. I smiled. "It was probably just my imagination." She forced a laugh. "Dreams are funny that way." But her hands were trembling. A few hours later, I pretended to leave for groceries but parked down the street. Within minutes, Melissa rushed out of the house carrying a small duffel bag. She was heading toward the same lake. I followed quietly, my phone recording. When she reached the water, she pulled something from the bag, the suitcase. She had found where I hid it, but as she knelt down to open it, a voice shouted behind her, "Melissa Vance!" "Police!" I turned. Officer Carter and 2 other detectives were approaching. Melissa froze, her eyes wide. "What is this?" Officer Carter stepped forward, holding a printed email. "We received an anonymous tip with evidence linking you to the Cedar Fall embezzlement case. We've verified the bank transfers." She turned toward me, her face pale. You did this?" I met her gaze steadily. "No, Melissa. You did this to yourself." She tried to run, but 2 officers grabbed her arms. Her screams echoed across the lake, a sharp contrast to the calm ripples of the water. That evening, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, silent, staring at his wedding ring. I placed Henry's note in front of him. "Your father tried to protect you," I whispered. Tears filled his eyes. I never saw it, Mom. I didn't want to believe she could. It's over now," I said gently. "But remember this, trust isn't about love. It's about truth." He nodded, wiping his face. "I'm sorry for doubting you." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're my son. You'll always be my reason to fight." That night, I sat by the window watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake. The water looked peaceful again, no more secrets sinking beneath its surface. Henry's letters lay beside me, the final one unopened. I hesitated, then unfolded it slowly. "Margaret," it read, "if you're reading this, it means the storm has passed. You've always been stronger than you know. And if you're sitting by that lake right now, look up. The stars are our witnesses that you made it through." I smiled through my tears. "I did, Henry," I whispered. "And I'll make sure Thomas never forgets who we are." The water was still. But for the first time in months, my heart wasn't. It was alive again, calm, steady, and free. 2 nights after Melissa's arrest, the house still smelled of lake water and burnt coffee. The reporters had finally left. Thomas sat in the living room, pale and hollow-eyed, replaying the same question again and again. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think Dad's death was really an accident?" His voice cracked. The question had haunted me too. Henry's car crash had never felt right. The brakes had failed on a brand-new sedan. How convenient. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, "but I'm going to find out." After Thomas went to bed, I opened Henry's metal box once more. At the bottom, taped beneath the false lining, was a small memory card. It contained a single video file dated 2 days before Henry's death. I pressed play. Henry appeared on screen, sitting in his office, eyes tired but determined. "If anything happens to me, it won't be random." I found evidence that Alan Grant and someone inside the company, Melissa Vance, are transferring funds through fake construction projects. I'm meeting Alan tomorrow to confront him. "Margaret, if you see this, trust your instincts." The clip ended with Henry's weary smile. My throat closed. Alan Grant, the man from the photograph, the man who had vanished after the Cedar Fall scandal. I didn't sleep that night. I searched online, cross-checking every trace of Alan Grant. Nothing recent. But an article popped up from 3 months ago. Local developer buys lakeside property for private retreat. The buyer's company name matched one in Henry's files, AG Ventures. He was here. The next morning, I drove toward the lake. The flash drive with Henry's evidence tucked in my purse. Fog rolled off the water like smoke. The mansion at the far end of the road looked unfinished. Construction halted midway. A man in a gray coat stood near the dock, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, I knew that face. Alan Grant. I parked behind a clump of trees and stepped out quietly. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hit record on my phone. Alan was speaking angrily. She got caught too soon. I told her to wait until the estate cleared. Now the cops are sniffing around, and that old woman probably has the files. Old woman. Me. I tightened my grip on the phone. He continued, pacing. "No, we move the money today. Cayman account ends at 6249. I'll handle what's left of the Roberts business myself." A twig snapped under my foot. Alan turned sharply. His eyes narrowed. "Who's there?" I stepped out, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You know exactly who." He froze, recognition dawning. "Margaret Roberts. You shouldn't be here." I was going to say the same thing, I replied. You killed my husband. Alan laughed, a dry, empty sound. Henry was stubborn. I offered him a cut, but he had to play the hero. My pulse roared in my ears. And Melissa? She played her part perfectly. Until she got sloppy, he took a step toward me. Give me the files, Margaret. You're too old for this game. I pulled the flash drive from my purse. This one? His eyes flicked to it. Yes. Good, I said, tossing it into the lake. The small splash echoed in the fog. That was a copy. Alan's jaw tightened. You! Before he could finish, sirens wailed in the distance. 2 police cars rolled up the gravel path. Detective Carter stepped out, gun drawn. Alan Grant, you're under arrest for the murder of Henry Roberts and financial fraud. Alan's eyes widened. You tricked me, I raised my phone. You confessed! He lunged toward the dock, but the officers tackled him to the ground. The metallic click of handcuffs rang louder than the gulls above. Back home, I stood by Henry's portrait. It's over, I whispered. They'll never hurt Thomas again. But my peace didn't last long. That evening, an unfamiliar number called. When I answered, a low voice said, Mrs. Roberts, we need to meet. It's about your husband's investigation. Alan wasn't the only one involved. The line went dead. Fear crawled up my spine. Who else I didn't tell Thomas? He needed rest, not more ghosts. But the next day, when I went to the police station to drop off additional evidence, Detective Carter pulled me aside. Mrs. Roberts, we found something in Alan Grant's files. He handed me a photo. Henry standing beside his business partner. Victor Hale, smiling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. This man was listed as a silent investor in Cedar Fall. Victor Hale, our old family friend. The man who attended Henry's funeral. I felt my knees weaken. He used to visit our house every week. Carter nodded grimly. We believe he financed both Alan and Melissa. He's still out there. That night, I locked every door and window. Rain lashed against the panes like restless fingers. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on the back door. Margaret. It's Victor. My blood ran cold. I took Henry's old revolver from the drawer and stepped quietly to the kitchen. Go away. Victor? I said through the door. His voice was calm. Let me explain. Alan went too far, but Henry's death, it wasn't supposed to happen. I steadied my hand. You think that makes it better? Silence. Then the faint sound of metal scraping, the lock. He was trying to pick it. I fired one warning shot into the ceiling. The noise shattered the night. Outside, footsteps retreated fast, splashing through puddles. I called Carter. Within minutes, patrol cars surrounded the house, but Victor was gone. Days turned into weeks. Melissa was sentenced to 15 years. Alan faced life without parole. Victor disappeared completely. Thomas tried to rebuild his life. But the betrayal scarred him deeply. One evening, as we closed the bakery together, he said quietly, Dad always said truth has a way of surfacing, like driftwood. I smiled faintly. He was right. The next morning, a letter arrived without a return address. Inside was a single photo, Victor Hale on a tropical beach, holding a newspaper dated yesterday. No words, no threats. Just proof that he was still out there. I burned the photo, watching the edges curl and blacken. Maybe some ghosts weren't meant to be chased. Maybe justice was sometimes knowing when to stop. That night, I sat by the lake again. The moonlight shimmered on the calm surface, and I whispered into the wind, Henry, it's done. I kept my promise. For the first time in years, I felt him near, not in grief, but in peace. A month passed after Alan's arrest, and the town of Cedar Fall returned to its sleepy rhythm. People whispered in bakeries, nodded politely at me in church. Pretending they didn't know my family's name had filled the evening news for weeks. Thomas tried to resume work at the hardware store, but I could see the shadows under his eyes. Every night, he double-checked the locks and stared at the lake through the window like he expected ghosts to rise from it. One Sunday morning, while dusting Henry's office, I found a tiny silver key taped under his old desk drawer. A key small enough for a safe deposit box. My heart started to race. I had gone through everything in that desk. Why had I never noticed it before? The engraving on the key read, First National, Box 307. That was Henry's old bank, the one downtown where Victor Hale still held an account. I didn't tell Thomas. He deserved peace, not more secrets. I waited until Monday, then drove to the bank alone. Inside, the clerk examined the key and led me to a narrow hallway of safety boxes. The smell of metal and old paper filled the air. When I opened box 307, I found a small black notebook and an envelope sealed with Henry's initials. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents, wire transfers, property deeds, and a single check written to Cedar Fall Youth Foundation. At the bottom, Henry had scribbled, "If anything happens to me, trust the foundation. The truth is buried there." The Youth Foundation. It was one of Victor's charities. My throat went dry. I flipped through the notebook. It was a log of meetings between Henry, Alan, and Victor. One entry caught my eye. March 14th. Victor insists the land under the lake hides something valuable. Says it's not just about money. Something valuable under the lake. Suddenly, Melissa's late-night trips, her fear of the suitcase being found, everything clicked into place. Maybe it wasn't just money she'd been hiding. That evening, I told Thomas part of it. Not about the notebook yet, but about returning to the lake. "Mom, no," he said immediately. "Let the police handle it." "They already dragged the area once," I said softly. "They stopped after they found the suitcase. But what if there's more? What if Dad wanted me to find something else?" Thomas hesitated, then finally sighed. "If you're going, I'm coming too." At dawn, we drove out together, fog wrapping the shoreline like a curtain. The same dock where Alan had been arrested still smelled faintly of oil and wood rot. Thomas took the small rowboat we used to fish when he was little. As we pushed off, the mist swallowed the shore. I guided us toward the cove where Melissa had thrown the suitcase. "Here," I whispered. We dropped a small anchor and used a long-handled rake I'd borrowed from the garage. The metal teeth scraped against something solid beneath the water. "Hold on," Thomas said, leaning over. He tugged, and with a sucking sound, a large, rusted toolbox emerged, dripping with weeds and mud. We pulled it into the boat. The latch was corroded but intact. Thomas pried it open with his pocket knife. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in black plastic. The smell hit us first. Old gasoline and something metallic. Thomas unwrapped it carefully. Inside were 3 old film reels labeled 1979, Cedar Fall Project, and beneath them a small waterproof recorder with Henry's initials etched on the side. Thomas and I stared at each other. "Dad filmed something," he murmured. We hurried home, set the reels carefully on the dining room table, and used Henry's vintage projector from the attic. The film flickered to life on the wall, grainy footage of a construction site near the lake, decades ago. Henry's younger voice narrated behind the camera. "Cedar Fall Research Facility, Day 12. Victor says the digging must go deeper. They found bones." I felt my stomach twist. The frame shifted. Men in hard hats hauling crates, a tarp lifted, revealing rows of skeletal remains. "Dozens of them. They say it's an abandoned military burial from the 40s, Henry's voice continued, shaky. "But Victor insists we keep quiet. He says the land is cursed, that it'll ruin the company if the truth gets out." The footage ended abruptly with a shot of Victor, younger but unmistakable, glaring into the camera. Thomas shut off the projector, pale as ash. Dad knew. He tried to expose it. "And they silenced him," I whispered. We took the footage straight to Detective Carter. He looked horrified as the images rolled. "This changes everything," he said. "If those bodies are real, it's a federal case." "But," he hesitated, "Victor's gone and the land was sold to a foreign investor 2 weeks ago. Whoever bought it may already know. So what do we do?" Thomas asked. "Stay low," Carter said firmly. "Until I can confirm the evidence, no one outside this room can know what you found." But the next morning, our mailbox was smashed open. Inside was a note written in red marker. "Stop digging, or you'll join Henry." Thomas wanted to move out immediately, but I refused. If we run now, they win. We reinforced the doors, installed cameras, and I backed up every file to cloud storage. Still that night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like footsteps. At 2 a.m., headlights flashed across the window. A car idled outside for several minutes, then drove away slowly. The next day, Detective Carter called. "Margaret, where exactly did you find the toolbox?" "In the cove near the old dock," he paused. "That area was sealed off this morning. Someone dynamited part of the lake bed. They're trying to destroy evidence." My hand flew to my mouth. "Victor, or whoever he's working for," Carter said grimly. "But I promise we'll find them." 2 nights later, as rain hammered the roof, Thomas burst into my room. "Mom, the back door camera." We ran to the monitor. The screen showed a figure in a raincoat crossing the yard. The face was hidden, but the gait, steady, deliberate, was familiar. He stopped at the porch, lifted his head toward the camera, and held up a newspaper with one headline circled in red: "Cedarfall Files Leak Online." Then he turned and vanished into the rain. The leak hadn't come from us. Someone else had the evidence. By morning, the story was everywhere. Photos of the skeletons, reports of illegal dumping, and references to a decades-long cover-up. The authorities swarmed the lake. When the news anchor said Victor Hale was now a fugitive wanted by Interpol, I felt the tension leave my body in a trembling exhale. Thomas hugged me tightly. "It's over," but I wasn't so sure. I knew men like Victor never disappeared. They waited. That night, I found one last thing inside Henry's notebook: a pressed bluebell flower and a note in his handwriting. "If truth destroys what we built, then let it burn. Love you always, M." I placed the flower in a small frame on my nightstand. Sometimes I still hear the lake's quiet ripples in my dreams, whispering secrets from below. But when I wake, I no longer feel afraid. I feel ready. Ready to live for the man who believed that even in the darkest water, truth will always float to the surface. 3 days after the Cedarfall scandal went public, the world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. Reporters parked outside my gate, their lenses peering through the hedges like vultures waiting for the next tragedy to land. Thomas begged me not to open the door to anyone, but curiosity, or maybe the instinct that had kept me alive this long, wouldn't let me sit idle. When the bell rang that Friday morning, I peeked through the blinds expecting another journalist. Instead, I saw a tall man in a beige coat holding a briefcase, his shoes caked with mud from the rain. He looked up, straight at the camera, and mouthed one word: "Henry." My breath caught. I opened the door just a crack. "Who are you?" "Name's Dr. Elliot Crane," he said quietly. "I worked with your husband." "Please, Mrs. Whitmore, we need to talk." His tone carried something I hadn't heard in months: truth. Reluctantly, I let him in. Elliot set his briefcase on the table, glancing nervously toward the window. "What you found in the lake, the reels, the notebook, it's only a fragment. Henry and I were part of the Cedarfall project back in 1979. Officially, we were mapping the water table. In reality," he hesitated, "we were cataloging what lay beneath it." "Those skeletons," I said. He nodded grimly. "Not soldiers, not miners. Test subjects." The word hit me like a punch. "Test subjects? For what?" "Genetic radiation studies. The government shut it down, or so we thought. Victor took control of the research privately. He wanted to extract minerals from the lake bed, a byproduct of the tests. But Henry realized it was poisoning the entire region. Elliot slid a folder toward me. Inside were photocopied memos stamped "classified." One photo showed barrels marked with hazard symbols being lowered into the lake. My stomach churned. And Victor killed him to keep it quiet? Henry tried to leak the data to the press. The night before, he could. His car malfunctioned on the old bridge. Elliot's voice broke. "I should have come forward, but Victor threatened my family." Thomas, who'd been listening silently, clenched his fists. "So my father died trying to stop all this, and we've been living over a toxic graveyard?" "Yes," Elliot whispered. "But there's more. The contamination isn't gone. Victor's buyers plan to drain part of the lake to mine the sediment." My blood ran cold. "If that happens, everyone in Cedarfall will get sick," he finished. "You have the only proof strong enough to stop them." That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked like it was breathing with me. I replayed Henry's voice from the old tape recorder, the one we'd found in the toolbox. "If the water ever runs low, don't let them touch the bottom." At dawn, I made a decision. I would expose everything, even if it cost me the little piece I had left, Thomas protested. "Mom, they already tried to scare us." What if they try again? Then we scare them with the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We called a local journalist, one not tied to Victor's network, and arranged to meet at the abandoned boathouse by the East Dock. When we arrived, the fog was thicker than ever. The reporter, a young woman named Clara Reeves, stepped out of her car clutching a recorder. Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure about this? Once we go public, there's no going back. I've lived in silence long enough, I said. Let's begin. I handed her Henry's notebook, the reels, and Elliot's folder. She started recording while I told everything. From Melissa's midnight trip to the suitcase sinking into the dark, to the blackmail note left in my mailbox. Thomas stood behind me, silent but proud. Then, midway through the interview, a dull thud echoed outside. Clara froze. Did you hear that? Thomas peered through a crack in the wall. A car. Black SUV, no plates. Before I could react, a voice shouted from the shore. Hand over the footage, Mrs. Whitmore. It belongs to the company. Elliot's warning replayed in my mind. They'll come for you once the files leak, Clara whispered. We have to run. Thomas grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back door. Shots rang out, 2 sharp cracks splintering the wood behind us. We sprinted through the trees toward the highway, mud sucking at our shoes. Clara clutched her camera like it was her lifeline. By the time we reached her car, my chest was burning. Thomas slammed the doors shut and floored the gas. The SUV's headlights flickered behind us, growing smaller until finally they vanished into the mist. At the police station, Detective Carter met us at the door. I told you not to stir this up, Margaret, he said, but there was relief in his eyes. Still, good work. He called in federal agents that same night. By morning, Cedar Fall Lake was sealed off again, this time with government tape and hazmat suits everywhere. The news spread faster than before. Clara's report aired nationally. Toxic secrets beneath Cedar Fall. The truth they tried to bury. Photos of the barrels, the skeletons, and Victor's forged deeds filled the screens. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt justice breathing down the same corridor as fear. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang again. I opened it carefully, expecting another reporter. Instead, Melissa stood there, pale, trembling, a suitcase in her hand. Margaret. Please, she whispered. I had nowhere else to go. Thomas appeared behind me, his jaw tightening. You've got to be kidding, she shook her head. I didn't know Victor would kill him. I thought it was about money. I swear. Her eyes darted toward the lake, visible from the porch. He made me throw that suitcase. Said it was evidence. When I saw the news, I realized what I'd done. I should have slammed the door, but something in her expression, shame mixed with real terror, stopped me. Come in, I said coldly. You can tell the truth for once. She stepped inside, shoulders shaking. Victor isn't gone, Margaret. He sent someone, a man named Doyle. He's tying up loose ends. You and Thomas are next. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Thomas grabbed his phone to call Carter, but before he could dial, a shadow passed across the window. A tall silhouette wearing a raincoat, standing perfectly still. Mom, he whispered. He's here. The porch light flickered. I reached for Henry's old shotgun mounted above the fireplace, a relic of better times, and loaded it with trembling hands. If Victor thought fear would silence us, he'd forgotten one thing. Henry's wife had buried her fear with him, and all that was left now was resolve. The air outside turned heavy, the way it does before a storm. Thomas whispered, Mom, get back. His eyes locked on the dark figure near the porch. Melissa pressed herself against the wall, clutching her suitcase like it could protect her. The front door handle twisted slowly, the metallic sound slicing through the silence. Who's there? I demanded, though my voice came out sharper than I intended. No reply. Just the soft creak of boots on the wooden steps. Thomas grabbed the curtain and peeked. He's wearing gloves, and he's holding something. I aimed the shotgun toward the door. Back away from my house or I'll shoot. Then a low laugh, muffled by the rain. A man's voice came through the door. You think I'm here to talk? Victor sends his regards, Melissa whimpered. It's Doyle. That's him. The next second, the door exploded inward, splinters flying across the hallway. I fired instinctively. The shotgun's recoil jolted through my shoulders. The blast hit the doorframe inches from the intruder's head, shattering the glass beside him. Doyle ducked and lunged forward. Thomas grabbed a lamp and smashed it over the man's arm. Sparks flew as the bulb shattered, plunging the room into flickering half-darkness. "Run!" Thomas shouted. We bolted toward the kitchen. Doyle stumbled after us, clutching a small black pistol. "Drop it!" Thomas yelled, hurling a chair in his path. It hit Doyle square in the chest, buying us a few seconds. I pulled Melissa toward the back door, but she tripped, her suitcase spilling open. Papers, jewelry, and an old photo of Victor with my husband Henry. "Leave it," I shouted, dragging her out onto the wet porch. Rain poured in sheets, turning the yard into a swamp. The lake shimmered in the distance, reflecting lightning. Thomas slammed the back door shut and jammed a broom through the handles. "That won't hold him long. Then we finish this," I said. We ran toward the dock. The boards creaked under our weight, slick with algae and rain. The wind howled across the lake like it carried the ghosts of every secret buried beneath it. Thomas turned to me, soaked to the bone. "What do we do, Mom?" I gripped his arm. "Your father built this dock. He said if the day ever came, we'd know what to do. There's a power switch under the boathouse." "What switch?" Before I could answer, Doyle's voice thundered behind us. "You can't hide, Margaret. You're too late. The lake's already been sold." He appeared at the dock's edge, his pistol aimed straight at Thomas. "Stop right there," he growled. "Give me the reels and the documents, or you'll watch your son die like your husband did." Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw his face clearly. Cold eyes, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. I lifted the shotgun again, but before I could pull the trigger, Doyle fired. The bullet whizzed past my ear, splintering the post beside me. Thomas lunged forward, tackling him. Both men tumbled onto the slick boards, struggling for control. The gun slid across the dock, landing near Melissa's feet. She froze, then kicked it into the lake. "Melissa!" Doyle roared, pushing Thomas off him. "You stupid!" But before he could finish, Thomas punched him hard. They grappled dangerously close to the edge. "Thomas!" I screamed, rushing toward them. Doyle caught him off guard, throwing a wild swing that knocked Thomas backward into the railing, which cracked under the impact. Thomas teetered for a split second, then fell backward into the lake with a splash. "No!" I screamed, running toward the edge. The rain blurred everything. I could barely see the ripples where he went under. Doyle smirked. "You should have stayed quiet, old woman." He raised a metal pipe from the dock and swung at me, but Melissa, shaking with rage, hurled her suitcase at his head. The metal corner hit him hard, and he stumbled. That gave me enough time. I yanked the hidden switch under the boathouse. A deep mechanical hum began beneath the water. Henry's failsafe. "What did you do?" Doyle shouted, grabbing the railing for balance. "Something my husband built to make sure the truth would never drown again," I said. The hum grew louder until the entire dock vibrated. Air bubbles erupted from beneath the surface, and the old storage valves opened underwater, releasing decades of trapped sediment, and the barrels Victor's men had hidden. Doyle's eyes widened. "No!" Before he could run, one of the barrels burst through the surface behind him, splitting open and releasing a thick, glowing chemical mist. Doyle staggered, coughing violently. His boots slipped, and he plunged into the lake. The mist spread, turning the water into a shimmering, toxic mirror. Melissa clung to the post. "What's happening?" "Justice," I whispered. Then I dove into the water after Thomas. The cold hit me like knives. I opened my eyes, the murky light burning. I saw him a few feet below, tangled in a net from the old dock supports. My lungs screamed for air as I reached for him, yanking the cords apart. When his body broke free, I kicked upward with everything I had left. We surfaced together, gasping. "Mom," he coughed. "You did it. You stopped him." "Not yet," I said, pulling him toward the shore. Behind us, the dock began to collapse, one board at a time, sinking into the poison that had been hidden for years. By the time we reached land, the rain had slowed to a whisper. The sirens of distant patrol cars echoed faintly. Carter's team had arrived. Later that night, under the emergency floodlights, Agents in hazmat suits swarmed the lake. Carter came up to me, his raincoat soaked. We found Doyle's body near the pump inlet. Victor's already in custody. His accounts frozen, his company shut down. He's finished, Margaret. I nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak. Melissa sat nearby on the steps, shivering beneath a blanket. She hadn't stopped crying since we pulled her from the dock. I'll testify, she whispered when I passed. Henry didn't deserve what we did to him. Neither did you. I didn't answer. Forgiveness was a word I wasn't ready to use. Thomas wrapped his arm around me as the sun began to rise. The mist over the lake glowed orange, and for the first time in years, it looked peaceful, almost pure. I thought of Henry, his laughter, his steady hands fixing the broken fence, his promise to protect us, even after he was gone, and I realized, in a way, he had kept that promise. Weeks later, when the EPA announced their official findings, Cedar Fall became the symbol of truth finally surfacing, literally and figuratively. The lake was drained, the toxins removed, and a monument erected in Henry's name. They called it the Guardian of the Lake. Every morning, I walk there with Thomas. We stand on the hill overlooking the calm water, where everything began and ended. And though I'll never forget the darkness, I've learned one truth that Henry already knew. Sometimes when evil tries to bury itself in silence, the only thing strong enough to raise it again is the voice of those it tried to break. 2 weeks passed before the lake was declared safe to approach again. The air still carried a faint metallic smell, and every ripple on the surface reminded me of the night everything changed. Thomas and I were back in the house, repairing the broken door and cleaning soot off the walls. We didn't speak much. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore, just heavy with everything we'd survived. Melissa showed up one morning holding a plain envelope. Her hair was tied back, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. "Mrs. Hayward," she began softly, I brought something for you." I wiped my hands on a rag and took the envelope. Inside was a signed confession addressed to the district attorney. She'd named Victor, Doyle, and herself. "I didn't know how deep it went," she said. "But I'll testify." "I owe you that." Thomas watched her warily. "Why now?" "Because," she whispered, "I saw the lake swallow the man who thought he could bury everything. And I realized I'd be next if I didn't tell the truth." For the first time since the nightmare began, I saw sincerity in her eyes, not fear, not manipulation, just remorse. The trial took months. Victor pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, environmental crimes, and conspiracy. Doyle's death sealed most of the case. Melissa's testimony, backed by my husband's old documents, broke the entire network apart. On the day the verdict was read, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Flashbulbs popped as I walked out holding Thomas's arm. A young journalist called out, "Mrs. Hayward, do you have anything to say to the people who betrayed your family?" I stopped, took a deep breath, and said, "They thought truth could drown, but truth floats." The headline the next morning read, "Widow who exposed the lake scandal speaks of justice and survival. Life after the storm was quieter, though not easier." I sold the old house by the lake and moved into a small cottage closer to town. The bakery Thomas once dreamed of owning finally became a reality, Hayward's Hearth. He insisted on naming it after Dad. Every morning, customers filled the shop with the smell of cinnamon and coffee. Sometimes they recognized me and whispered, "That's the woman who brought the truth out of Cedar Fall Lake." I just smiled and handed them their change. Melissa, after serving 6 months under protective supervision, came to see me one afternoon. She was thinner, calmer, her voice steady. "I'm moving to Portland," she said. "Starting over. I know you'll never forgive me, but I wanted to thank you for not letting me drown with the rest of them." I nodded slowly. "Start over right. Don't hide from what you were. Learn from it." She hesitated at the door. "You saved my life that night. I'll never forget it." When she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching her walk down the street until she disappeared into the crowd. That evening, Thomas closed the bakery early and took me to the lake. The restoration was complete. New walkways, fresh trees, clean water glimmering under the sunset. A small brass plaque bore my husband's name, Henry Hayward, Guardian of Truth. "Dad would have liked this," Thomas said, tossing a pebble into the water. "He always said the lake listens," I smiled. He was right. And maybe it finally answered. We stood in silence until the sky turned deep violet. The reflection of the new dock lights shimmered like tiny stars. "Mom," Thomas said after a while, "do you ever regret what happened?" I thought about the fear, the betrayal, the years of trust shattered. Then I shook my head. No, because if it hadn't happened, I'd still be living blind to what people are capable of. And what I'm capable of surviving. He nodded, and I saw pride flicker in his eyes. Later that night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years, "Truth costs everything, but lies cost your soul." I closed the book and felt lighter. The town eventually moved on. Tourists returned to the lake. Children played where the dock used to creak. People stopped whispering when they saw me. They started waving instead. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I still hear the faint hum beneath the surface. The echo of Henry's safeguard still alive. Still watching. I like to think it's his way of saying, I kept my promise. One evening, a letter arrived from an unknown sender. Inside was a single line typed on old stationery. What you found in the lake wasn't the last secret. There was no signature, only a faint watermark. Department of State Environmental Division. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. For a moment the old fear stirred again, but then I smiled. Some secrets can wait. Because now I wasn't the same woman who once trembled by the water's edge. I was the woman who faced the storm and lived to tell it. I folded the letter, locked it in my desk, and went to bed with the calm of someone who finally understands that survival isn't about avoiding the dark. It's about learning to walk through it with your head held high. The next morning, I stood at the bakery window watching the sunrise spill gold across the rooftops. Thomas flipped the sign to open and poured 2 coffees. He handed me one and smiled. "For the record, Mom, you're kind of a legend now," I laughed softly. "Let's just say I'm a woman who stopped pretending her life was small." The bell above the door jingled as the first customers came in. Their chatter filled the room, warm and ordinary, the kind of peace I once thought I'd never have again. And as the smell of fresh bread rose through the air, I whispered to myself, "Henry, you can rest now. The truth is safe." When I woke up the next morning, the world outside looked calm. Birds were chirping, the lake shimmered in the distance, and sunlight poured through the curtains. But inside me, everything was chaos. I couldn't erase the image of that suitcase sinking into the dark water. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughter-in-law, Clara, standing there under the moonlight, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly before she let it drop. What had she been hiding? And more importantly, what had I pulled out of that lake? The memory of opening that soaked suitcase still made my skin crawl. The smell of mud and algae, the weight of something heavy wrapped in plastic bags, and the fear that I might find something I wasn't ready to see. But now, as the morning sun rose, the truth felt even heavier than the suitcase itself. I walked downstairs, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. My son, Daniel, had already left for work. Clara's car was gone too. Perfect. I needed time to think. I had hidden what I found inside that suitcase in the old attic trunk, the one Daniel and Clara never touched, but there was something else. A note. A single wet piece of paper tucked inside the lining. I hadn't dared to read it last night. I'd been too shocked. Now my hands trembled as I unfolded it. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still clear enough to read. "If you're reading this, it means I failed. Tell Daniel I'm sorry. He'll never understand why I did it. But please, don't let him find out the truth. It will destroy him." I froze. M? Who was M? My name was Helen. Clara's was Clara. Daniel's name began with D. There was no M in our family. I turned the paper over. Nothing else. My heart pounded faster. The note was old, the paper yellowed and worn. The edges looked frayed, as if it had been handled many times before. Suddenly, a sound, a car door slamming outside. My heart jumped. I quickly folded the note and shoved it back into the drawer. Clara's car had just pulled up. I rushed to the window. She got out, carrying grocery bags, looking as calm as ever. Her hair was tied neatly, her smile polite when she saw me at the window. "Good morning, Mom," she called out sweetly. I forced a smile back. "Good morning, dear. You're up early," she nodded. "Had to pick up some things for dinner. Daniel said he's bringing a friend tonight. Her voice was soft, normal, too normal. And that's what terrified me most. People who had nothing to hide didn't act that perfectly composed. My eyes followed her every move as she entered the kitchen, placing the grocery bags on the counter. As she turned around, her eyes met mine, just for a second, and there was something cold in them. Something calculating. "Everything all right?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I smiled faintly. "Yes, of course. Just didn't sleep well." "Still thinking about Daniel's promotion?" she said, reaching into a bag. "You worry too much, but that wasn't what I was thinking about." My mind was screaming questions. Who was M? What was in that suitcase really meant for? And why had Clara gone to the lake at midnight to throw it away? Hours passed slowly. Clara acted as if nothing was wrong, humming softly while she cleaned the kitchen, texting on her phone occasionally. I tried to distract myself by baking, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Around noon, Daniel called. "Mom, everything okay?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just keeping busy." "Good. Listen, Clara told me you've been having nightmares again. Try to rest, okay?" My stomach turned. Nightmares? She was already preparing the narrative, laying the groundwork in case I said something. I didn't argue. Instead, I said softly, "Of course, darling. Don't worry about me." After the call, I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I had to find out what M stood for. I opened my phone and searched for missing persons in the area over the last few years. Nothing that matched. Then I searched property records. The lake had belonged to an old family before it was sold to developers, the McAllisters. My eyes widened. McAllister. M, that name triggered a memory. Clara had once mentioned an aunt she used to visit near Lake Willow, an aunt she said had moved abroad years ago. Could that have been a lie? Just then, the door creaked open slightly. I jumped. Clara stood there, smiling faintly. "Oh, sorry," she said. "Didn't mean to startle you. I just wanted to tell you lunch is ready." Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered a second too long, as if she was studying me. "Thank you, dear," I replied softly, folding my phone screen down. During lunch, Clara kept up her charming act, talking about recipes, upcoming events, even laughing about something Daniel had said last night. But under the table, her leg was shaking slightly, a nervous tic. She wasn't as calm as she pretended to be. After lunch, when she went upstairs to take a shower, I slipped quietly into her office. She kept everything tidy, files labeled, shelves neat, but her laptop was still on, open on a page titled Lake Property, McAllister Estate. My heart nearly stopped. I quickly read what I could before I heard footsteps upstairs. The document showed transfer records, bank transactions, and something labeled Confidential Deed Clause, not to be disclosed. Then, a sound. The bathroom door opened. I quickly closed the laptop and slipped out of the office, pretending to dust a nearby shelf. Clara came downstairs, her hair still damp, a towel around her shoulders. "Were you in my office?" she asked suddenly. The question came like a blade out of nowhere. I froze for a second but managed a calm voice. "No, why?" She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled. "Just asking. You're so quiet lately, Helen. Makes me nervous." I laughed softly. "Don't be silly." But my hands were trembling. That night, after everyone went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I took the flashlight and crept up to the attic. My old trunk sat there under a layer of dust. I opened it slowly. The suitcase was still inside, wrapped in black plastic. I pulled it out, set it on the floor, and unzipped it again. This time, I took a closer look at what I'd found. A small metal box, rusted but locked tight. I'd missed it the first time, hidden under the folded clothes. I turned it over in my hands. The initials MM were engraved faintly on the side. I grabbed a screwdriver and forced the lock open. Inside were old photographs, a woman with dark hair and kind eyes standing near the same lake. On the back of one photo, a handwritten note, "To my dearest Clara, with love, Aunt Margaret, Margaret McAllister, MM." So, the suitcase hadn't contained evidence of a murder. It had contained memories. A past Clara wanted to erase, but why? Just then, I heard a soft creak behind me. I turned, heart pounding. Clara was standing at the attic door, her face half hidden in the shadows. "What are you doing with that?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling but cold. I didn't answer. I just held up the photograph. Why did you throw this away, Clara? She stepped closer, her expression shifting from fear to anger. You shouldn't have seen that, my hands shook. Then tell me the truth. Who is Aunt Margaret? And what did she do to you? Her jaw tightened. Not what she did to me, Helen. What she did to Daniel. My breath caught. Daniel, what are you talking about? Clara's eyes glistened, a tear finally rolling down her cheek. Aunt Margaret wasn't just my aunt. She was Daniel's biological mother. My world tilted. I couldn't breathe, she continued, voice cracking. Your husband. Before he married you, he had a child with her. Daniel. She gave him up, and you never knew. I stared at Clara in disbelief, my heart hammering so violently that I could barely breathe. What did you just say? I whispered. Clara's eyes were red, her voice low but firm. You heard me. Daniel isn't your biological son. He's Margaret's. The suitcase you found, those photos, those letters, they were hers. I threw them away because I didn't want you to find out. Because I knew it would destroy you. I stumbled back, clutching the old photograph. The woman's kind smile, the one I'd always mistaken for a distant resemblance to Clara, now looked hauntingly familiar. The same eyes. The same faint dimple near her cheek. I suddenly realized why Daniel never quite looked like me or my late husband. My knees weakened. No, that's not possible. I raised him. I was there for his first steps, his first words. He's my son. Clara took a step closer, her expression softening. You are his mother, Helen. But you weren't supposed to know the truth. Your husband made sure of that before he died. I sank onto the old chest, clutching the edge for balance. Why are you telling me this now? I asked hoarsely. Clara's jaw tightened. Because Margaret left behind more than just photos. She left a letter addressed to you. I tried to destroy it, but since you've already found everything, you deserve to read it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded envelope, the paper yellowed with time. My trembling hands opened it. Helen, if you're reading this, it means the truth has found you. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had no choice. When Daniel was born, your husband came to me. He said you couldn't conceive, that he wanted to give you the one thing you'd always dreamed of, a child. I thought I was doing something selfless, but when I saw how much he loved you both, I knew I had to disappear. You're his real mother now, Helen, the one who gave him love, not just life. Please forgive me. Margaret, tears blurred my vision. My throat burned as I clutched the letter to my chest. All those years of motherhood, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, none of it was built on a lie. It was real. I was real. But the betrayal of my husband's silence, the secret he'd buried with his heart, tore me apart. Clara watched me quietly. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, she said softly. But when I found Margaret's things in that storage house years ago, I knew this secret would explode one day. I just didn't want it to destroy Daniel's memory of his father. I looked up sharply. And that's why you threw the suitcase into the lake? To protect him? She nodded slowly. Yes, but there's more. She took a deep breath. That money your husband left behind, the inheritance, it's in Daniel's name. But there's a hidden clause. If any proof surfaced that he was adopted, the money would revert to charity. That's why I panicked when you started cleaning the attic last week. If Daniel ever learns the truth, he loses everything. For a long moment, the only sound in the attic was our ragged breathing. The wind howled faintly through the old window, carrying with it the weight of decades of lies. So you were protecting Daniel. I murmured, more to myself than to her. Clara nodded, tears glistening on her lashes. I may not always show it, Helen, but I love him. I didn't marry him for money. I married him because he's the only good thing in my life. But I couldn't let that secret destroy him or you. I felt my anger melting into something deeper, sadness, exhaustion, even understanding. But something still didn't fit. Then why did you act so nervous these last few days? Why didn't you just tell me? Clara's eyes dropped to the floor. Because someone else knows, she said quietly. Someone who's been blackmailing me. I froze. What? She swallowed hard. A man named Victor. He was Margaret's lawyer. He found out I destroyed the suitcase the first time. He's been demanding money from me ever since, threatening to tell Daniel the truth. I've been paying him for months, Helen. And last night, I couldn't anymore. The pieces fell into place like shards of glass. The midnight trip to the lake, the trembling hands, the fear in her eyes when she saw me that morning. "You weren't trying to hide a crime," I whispered. "You were trying to bury evidence of blackmail." Clara nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, I just wanted to end it before Daniel found out. I thought if I threw it all away, he'd finally stop. But then you followed me." I stared at her, my heart breaking for both of us. For the first time since my husband's death, I understood the twisted web of secrets binding us all together. Love, lies, fear, and guilt. I reached out, taking Clara's trembling hands. "We're not going to hide anymore," I said firmly. "We'll go to the police. Victor can't hold this over us forever." She looked up, startled. "You'd help me? After everything?" I managed a small smile. "You're my family, Clara, and Daniel's happiness depends on both of us now." That night, we went to the police station together, carrying Margaret's letter and the photographs as evidence. The officers promised to track down Victor. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange peace wash over me. The kind that comes when the truth, no matter how painful, finally sees the light. The next morning, Daniel came into the kitchen, looking tired but calm. "Mom," he said, "Clara told me everything. About Aunt Margaret, about the blackmail, about you helping her." "I don't know how to thank you," I smiled softly, brushing a tear from his cheek. "Just be happy, Daniel. That's all the thanks I need." Later that day, Clara came to me quietly, holding a small box. Inside was the locket from the suitcase, a photo of Margaret on one side and a newborn baby on the other. "I think this belongs to you," she said. I took it, my heart full. "No," I whispered. "It belongs to all of us." For years, our family had been built on secrets buried at the bottom of a lake. But in the end, what surfaced wasn't just the truth. It was forgiveness. And maybe that's the most unthinkable thing of all.